Hello and welcome to Movies, Films, and Flicks. I am Mark Hoffmeyer, and joining me is a man that is planning to destroy an animated town so he can put in a freeway. It's Niall Moore.
Hey, how you doing, Mark?
That's pretty that's dastardly. You created a dip, you're killing shoes, you are destroying public transportation, and you're putting in freeways.
Well, I'm just thinking about transportation, mass transit for the win.
You know what's funny? I haven't watched it's been a while since I watched this movie again. And then when the whole plan was that it was a freeway
Yeah, it's
to
basically a freeway with like gas stations and like basically rest stops and billboards. That was
basically
his
any
whole thing.
on and off ramp when you're driving on the highway, which I love. And it was interesting on the commentary. The writers, Jeffrey Price and Peter Seaman, were talking about how Spielberg was like, we need a plot. So they're like, okay, so they based their plot on an actual thing in California. And you've probably done this research too, where there was a red line and then they destroyed it because they wanted to put a freeway in. But it was like this big thing. So they actually based it in California history, this movie.
Yeah,
The,
and that kind of grounds it that it's not completely stupid. It is something that you could totally see happening where it's like, oh, because I've seen it happen in Dublin as well. Like there used to be trams in Dublin that kind of got done away with to support cars, and then about 20 years ago they brought back trams again, and they might just keep recycling the same things when they were like, actually, having streetcars is a good idea.
Reminds me of that movie that just came out, The Boys from County Hell. I don't know if you've heard about it, the Irish vampire movie about how they disrupt some vampire ruins because they're going to put a bypass in there, and then the vampires just
That
killing
sounds
people.
like something people in Ireland would protest about. Disrupting the vampire ruins, no bypasses.
That was big for you, wasn't it, growing up? Vampire ruins being disrupted, and you had to go battle them.
Something like that. They were definitely big on building bypasses. I'm not too sure about any vampire ruins.
Well, back to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. All right, so I'm so glad that we did this because I worked on, I kind of had a refresher. I worked on an episode of Rotten Tomatoes Versus where we did Space Jam versus Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So I got to do a ton of research about it then, but then I didn't really do a full rewatch. I just included a ton of research. And so now going through it and just watching it frame for frame and listening to the commentaries, listen to every documentary I can find. I mean, this was a gnarly movie to make. What, 7 months of shooting, a year of
Well,
post production.
they made what, like basically 2/3 movies almost in one. Like they
Yeah.
had to film essentially a full feature film, and then they had animators who basically had to animate a full feature film as well. And then ILM had to go away and basically composite the two of them together into this, what we ended up with today.
Yeah, adding shadows and I mean, what like you had all the puppeteers on the stage, like holding the guns and the octopus with its shaker. I mean, just such a oh man, this is man. Imagine being on a set. It would move. Okay, I have three questions for you, real quick. Bob Hoskins, should he have been nominated for an Academy Award for this movie?
Yeah, I think so. Like he was ridiculously believable that he was interacting with the character of Roger Rabbit. It's like, okay, Roger Rabbit is there, and you believe it. And he said he based his performance on watching his 3-year-old daughter doing imaginary play and basically really believing what she was playing. And he was just like, I kind of just watched her for inspiration and then kind of went with it and looked how she acted and looked how she pretended and then just gave it everything. But yeah, he was fantastic.
And just watching him and then watching him on the green screen, like when he finally goes to Toontown, and just that's all just on a stage, and just watching his reactions and his pantomime and the way he kept eye lines. Like this is, you know, it, yeah, I think he should have been nominated for an Academy Award. I really do. I mean, it is just wonderful. Now, second, the dip. How horrifying is that shoe scene? From a scale of 1 to
Man,
10.
I remember that from growing up. It was just absolutely horrific. You'd watch like cartoons and stuff, and you'd watch Tom and Jerry like knock the absolute crap out of each other. But by the end, one of them's bandaged up, or the other one is like, just laughing, or they're sitting, in a pile or a heap together, and everyone's just like beat up. But you don't see Toons die. Like this was basically, you know, this guy's straight up murdering cartoons. He could just destroy any of them. And that's what makes him such a good villain. It's just like, oh, he's not even giving them a trial. He's just executing people for fun. This guy is bad news.
And it's basically the equivalent of okay, let's say in Die Hard, Alan Rickman walks into the set and he is in Nakatomi Plaza. He's playing Hans Gruber, and there's a kitten, and he just picks the kitten up and he rips the thing's head off and throws it out of a window. Like that's
That
kind of the equivalent. That is the equivalent of what happened here because
Yeah, it's a nothing character, with no. It's done. The shoe's done nothing except be knocked out of a box and basically be flopping around on the floor. And it's just like, oh, here's a perfect chance for me to just be barbaric and kill something.
and the thing's being cute too. It's just it's just on Doom's flag, just kind of being nice, and it gets murdered. And the interesting thing, Nancy Cartwright voiced the
Yeah,
shoe,
yeah, she did.
and then a year later, she was on The Simpsons, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I mean that
And every year since then, basically.
she's so rich, she could just buy an island right now. Jeez Louise. But I mean, oh gosh. So all right, so that's my second question. Third, did you think this movie holds up?
Oh yeah, like I'm watching it. I watched it probably finished up 10 minutes before I jumped on to talk to you. The reason it holds up is because of the work that they put in. Like we kind of touched on, a tiny bit already. The puppeteers being on set, having these physical objects, having to actually create the shots in a believable way, and having some really, really talented animators working on it as well, and being able to basically composite all of that together. I think without using CGI, because back then CGI obviously wasn't really a thing. It had been used for very, very limited kind
Mm-hmm.
of effects, but nothing large scale. If you look at, say, the likes of Space Jam, even like the '95 version, Michael Jordan, that doesn't really hold up that well.
No. Mm-mm.
Whereas you look at Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and because of how meticulous they were in crafting the effects and working, and 4 layers of effects that ILM put on each frame. There was the animated bit, there was the live action bit, there was like a shading shadows bit, and there was like
The
the
sequin dress.
lighting, and basically just like compositing all of this together. It just makes it look. You don't get jarred out of it at any point. There's no where it's like, oh, that's obviously fake. Like from the moment you're watching it, it's just like, okay, yeah, this is a world where toons are interacting with humans. It looks
And
right.
I love that you said that too. And when listening to the commentaries, Zemeckis, and also the behind the scenes documentaries, Zemeckis said, "If it's not hard, why am I doing it?" So I think this movie had the perfect director, and then it had Dean Cundey, who had shot Halloween, The Thing, Escape from New York, Back to the Future, Big Trouble in Little China, Roadhouse. He would go on to do Jurassic Park. He was a big animation nut. And then you had Spielberg behind the scenes. You had like Joel Silver and like Frank Marshall. Like Joel Silver just acts as an actor, but like, yeah, Frank Marshall
Yeah,
popping up.
he was the director of the
Hmm.
animated short at the start, wasn't he?
I'll save you, baby. You had ILM, who just every time I learn more about ILM, the more impressed I am with them. We covered Death Becomes Her, and then I also covered a lot of Stephen Sommers movies, and ILM worked on his. And it seems like every time ILM and George Lucas, all the behind the scenes documentaries, whenever they get handed a show, they're like, "We've never done this before. This is impossible, but we're gonna do it." Like so, they don't have any of this existing tech ahead of time. They just have to come up with it and make it work. And what I love too is Zemeckis, like he could have shot flat plates and a shit scene and then made it easy for the animators, but the camera's
Yeah,
moving.
but he did not want to do it that way. It
No.
was, and that's kind of another reason why it holds up so well, because it's not like the likes of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang or Mary Poppins or whatever, where you've got these actors interacting with animated pieces, but it's very much contained and on like a just a flat background.
And no
Whereas
shadows.
here, the camera's moving. You've got pans. Like there's one scene where the camera kind of pulls back on Jessica and then pushes forward and takes her slightly out of focus and goes up to like look up at the window. And like they had to think about how they could make animation go out of focus to enable those camera movements. Like it's just ridiculously creative, the things they had to come up with. And it's just, every single thing I read or heard about this movie, it just made me like more interested in just hearing all about the little bits they did, because it just turned out so cool.
And you know what I love too is, I mean, when you this movie made 154 million, but when you inflate it for like when it's adjusted for inflation, it's 344 million dollars. And like, let me show you the run for this movie. So this movie came out late June and it ran through October in the theaters, but it opened to 11 million. Then the second weekend was 14 million. The third weekend was 11 million. The fourth weekend was 8.5 million. The fifth weekend, so it started at 1, then it was in the second place, third place, then it jumped back to first place with 9 million. And then it had 6.5 million, 5.8 million, 4.3 million, 3.6 million, 2.9 million, 4.4, 1.8 million, 2 million, 1.6 million, 1.5 million, 1.4 million, 1 million. I've researched movies from the 70s and 80s and 90s, and they haven't had this run. I mean, there were less VCRs, there were less, less on cable. You didn't have all the streaming options. But yeah, I mean, I've researched so many movies from the 80s, 90s, 70s that this is this is an epic run. I mean, this is one of those runs where, I mean, right now, with, after adjusted for inflation, let's see, it is the 215th highest grossing film domestically of all time. It's just one of those epic runs, which means the word of mouth was strong for this, because normally you very rarely have a fourth weekend that's almost as big as the first weekend. So people just kept coming to this. Like, the word of mouth must have been crazy. I didn't get to catch this when I was 7. Did you see this in the theater?
I don't think so. I remember it was my first audiobook that I can remember having. Like, my parents had bought me like this like companion book, and it came with a cassette tape, and it had Bob Hoskins and Charles Fleischer like recording their voices on it. So it'd be like reading some of the story, and then you'd have like Roger Rabbit's voice and stuff. I used to listen to it like going asleep, but I don't think I saw it in the theaters, or if I did, I don't really remember it. But I definitely saw it when I was quite young.
Man, that dip. And then his eyes coming out at the end. I mean, Christopher
Yeah.
Lloyd, he never blinks in this movie. And he's just such an evil villain. And then you have the Weasels. I like that there were supposed to be 7 Weasels originally, but then they just ran out of time and money, and they just made 5 of them, which kind
Yeah,
of
there
makes me.
was like a tiny little moment, which I think kind of paid homage to that, was when they were first introduced, and it was when they first introduced the thing about them dying from laughing, because Christopher Lloyd is like, stop laughing now or you'll die like your cousins, basically,
Oh my
which
gosh. Oh
something
no.
I hadn't picked up on before. Your cousin, maybe it was cousin hyenas, maybe.
Oh my gosh. And I love that their names are Smarty, Stupid, Wheezy, Greasy, and Psycho.
Yeah.
And they laugh themselves to death. Isn't it? Okay, Bob Hoskins, like, when I look at him, I kind of see this surly, serious guy, but then he's doing these steps around and he's being silly and,
But
man,
look at him, like, he
he's a
was in
tank.
this. He was in Hook, for
Yeah,
example,
that's
like where he was
true.
playing like a quite silly Smee.
So I guess he does like getting silly.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh man. So what else? What other moments do you love in this movie? Like, what other cool research did you pick up
So
on?
there's one gag that just cracks me up every time, even though I know it's coming, and that's the booby trap.
Oh
It just
gosh.
like it just gets me every single time. I'm just like, it's like he's reaching around, and I'm like, oh, I remember there's a gag here, and I'm like, is it a mouse trap? Is it? And then the bear trap comes out, and Hoskins just completely deadpan. It's like, oh, nice booby trap. I'm just like, oh, that is just,
And he
it's
says it
just
so
perfect.
earnestly, right? It's so earnest the way he says it. It's just such a flat delivery. I love his scotch on the rocks, and that's ice, not rocks.
And then they brought him a rock anyway.
Oh man. And then the cattle call.
Yeah.
Oh man. There's so many sight gags. This is such a visually rich movie. I mean, you get Dumbo
Well,
popping
I'd
up
say
and
you'd have to pause it almost, particularly in the scenes in Toontown. You'd nearly need to pause every frame to catch all of what's in there. I was kind of like looking at things, and there was like the police building had like a Yosemite Sam mustache, and was like looking to its right at the bar building, which was visibly drunk and swaying, and the police building was just kind of looking at the bar building, being like, "What the hell are you doing?"